I was able to tell people, no, there's one guy who saw a pair of legs walking across the road, but no upper torso. Well, my name's Thom Powell, and I was a career science teacher in Portland. I had a few days a year where half the kids were leaving early for vacation, and so you have these, what the teachers call throwaway days. And I did a Bigfoot presentation on these throwaway days because it was fun. The district provided me with a film, and that was a 16 millimeter copy of Leonard Nimoy, In Search Of. And by today's standards, it was a terrible representation of the Bigfoot phenomenon. Just a lot of talking heads. Guy said, I saw it run across the road. I was on my way home from the bar. Anyway, I would show it to the kids and actually ridicule the subject and say, this is an example of pseudoscience. This is perhaps reprehensible. But anyway, the kids enjoyed it, made a lot of jokes. But I do remember watching that film over and over again. I had 6 different sections of the same class, so I watched the film 6 times every year. And I remember thinking that Krantz was very compelling in what he explained. And that did get me to kind of scratching my chin and thinking, man, it could be, it's arrogant to think that we know everything that's out there. But then when I bought this place in '85, I met some neighbors who used to live right up the road, and a young guy would come over and we'd have a beer and he'd help me with loading plywood, and then we'd sit down and he said, by the way, that Bigfoot thing, we get that out here. And I said, you do? I've spent half my career ridiculing that. You do? Oh, yeah, my dad's seen it. In fact, my dad's a Forest Service employee, and when the woodcutters come in wide-eyed and sweating and say, I saw something, they always turned him over to his dad, Bruce Reed, and his dad would say, all right, get in the car, let's go, show me the place. And there would be the tracks up in the snow, and he would follow them. And not to any particular avail. They always went impossibly far, but all of a sudden this topic that I ridiculed took on a local import that I did not expect. Later, I was at the little country store up the road, and there was a little business card on there and said, we collect Bigfoot sightings. And this guy's name was Frank Kanister. He lived in Colton, which is a hotbed, by the way, of Bigfoot sightings. And he would follow up on these reports. And so I called him up and said, I teach this presentation every year, and do you have any artifacts that I could borrow? I'm sure you value them highly, but could I just borrow them for one day, show the kids? Oh, yeah, here's some track casts. And then he explained what he understood to be the fact of the matter, and he was a bit sort of starry-eyed about the Bigfoot thing. Like a lot of people, he saw evidence everywhere, and the rest of us were kind of like, but still, he was serious about it, and it opened my eyes to the fact that, oh my God, this is perhaps more authentic than I ever expected. Well, about then, it was 1994, the internet was first coming on. We all thought we were so cool with Netscape Navigator and modems that went beep, boop, beep, and then here was Matt Moneymaker's BFRO website. I reached out to him for, again, some artifacts for some information that I could use in my presentation. and he said, "We need an investigator in your area. Would you mind processing some of these reports that we get?" And I said, no, that would be fine. It'd be very interesting. I'd love to. And I was getting reports that were 2-3 miles away from where we're sitting, and in some cases further away, Colton. One of the most interesting ones was the couple that said, we saw it come out of the woods at dawn. We were eating an early breakfast, getting ready to go on the road, and here comes this upright form. It grabs the apple tree by the trunk and shakes it. All the apples fell. And then 2 more come out of the woods, and they gathered them up and spirited away all the apples. The reason that was peculiar is because within a few weeks of my taking possession of this piece of property, the neighbor next door, who was a dentist, he accused me of stealing his apples. And I thought, well, that's a weird thing. Why would I mean, I know everybody in Clackamas County has a gun. I'm not going to risk getting shot for a few apples. Well, then one of the teachers that I worked with said, "Oh, I used to know your neighbor. He's dead now, but he used to tell us about his neighbor stealing his apples." I'm like, here we go again. And I explained to the teacher, Diane George, that why would I risk getting shot over 25 cents worth of fruit? She said, no, it wasn't 25 cents for the fruit. It was the whole tree. The whole tree disappeared in one night. And it's like, that's in a sighting. That happens. And what, of course, is implied there is that I know I didn't steal his fruit, but here we are at the end of the road. We have Sasquatch activity quite likely right here. And the events to support it, that being the huge loss of fruit in one night. And the girls who live there now, they're not girls, they're women, but they looked out their window one day. The dogs were going crazy, 4:30 in the morning, wanted out. They looked out, and there in the apple tree was a dark, upright form standing there. There's no way they were going to let the dogs out, but they looked at it for a while, and then it moved on. So there are putative Sasquatch sightings, within 400 yards of where we're sitting. But, you can't just get out there and wait for it, because it doesn't work that way. You more or less have to ignore it and let them come to you. One of my first influences was this quirky local character named Frank Kniester, who was actively gathering sighting reports in the most ordinary way possible, little sign on the country store bulletin board. And then, of course, Matt Moneymaker threw not just crumbs, but volumes my way, because he had lost his other investigators when I just stumbled along, and so a large amount of sighting reports were landing in my lap, more than I could do. And I was the only investigator for the entire northwest region of the United States. He didn't have anybody else at the time. Every once in a while, he would be on Art Bell or one of these late night radio shows with the call-ins. And one thing was clear: the night after that happened, there was an explosion of reports that would happen on his website. And what I found very quickly is that the closer you are to Mount Rainier, the more things go on. So Mount Rainier is one of these hotbeds, but so is Colton, which is 11 miles away. So is Estacada, which is 10 miles away. So you really don't have to go far to be in places where the sightings happen. But that was basically it. I was on my own. There weren't that many people who you could reach out to. And so I was just investigating sightings and recording and putting it all on my Apple Macintosh. until I finally realized if this hard drive crashes, which they all do eventually, I'm going to lose all of this work. And so that's when I decided maybe I should just write it all down, get it in print, and publish something. So that was by then 2003, and that's when I came out with my first book, The Locals. And I sent a manuscript to Matt, and he was outraged because he thought that, well, no one gets to write a book without his approval, first of all. Second of all, he was quite sure that it was going to be a send-up of his mercurial ways, which it was not. He was not. He was barely mentioned. But anyway, at that point, BFRO and I parted ways, and as he does with so many people. But I knew exactly what was going to happen before it happened, and so I was ready to be done anyway. By then, he had lots of other people. Rick Knoll and everybody else was helping him out. He doesn't need me anymore, and frankly, I'm kind of burnt out on this stuff. So I quit doing the website stuff. But by then, in 2003, I had seen the patterns that the craziest things do in fact surface again and again. There are people who say, I saw it dissolve in front of my eyes. And the thing that they want to know is, are there other people who can commiserate with this? Because it really bothers me. I mean, I lie awake at night wondering, did I really see that? Or did my mind create that? And I was able to tell people, no, there's one guy who saw a pair of legs walking across the road, but no upper torso. And there was another guy who saw one dissolve in a clear cut out by Timber, Oregon, and he said it was like the Star Trek, teleporter thing. They just dissolved, and it wasn't there anymore. So some of the weirdest stuff does in fact have what I think you could at least call statistical validity. There's more than one person who report the same thing. They're not in contact with each other. Therefore, I think these claims, when taken as a group, hold water, even though they're outliers with respect to this idea that Sasquatch is just a hairy beast that's trucking around and we haven't caught up with. The big paradigm shift happened when I found a couple near Mount Rainier who felt they were having repeat visitations. They said, we see what appears to be 3 generations, and we call them grandpa, grandma, dad, mom, the kids, the little ones. They felt there were 3 generations. They lived about 20 miles from Mount Rainier, very isolated, and they were the place that I was looking for to do a camera experiment. We started putting cameras at Alan and April's place in 1998. The cameras were quite expensive by today's standards, and really clunky. I mean, we used film, and we would take the film out with only 2 pictures, because then you take them to Walgreens or Costco and have them developed. It's none of this. Well, look, you could just get to see right there. It was all a much more protracted process, but my goal was to capture photographic evidence, and here was the perfect place to do it, I felt. And the name of the couple, Alan and April Hoyt, were very welcoming of my efforts and very willing to help. So we started putting cameras around their property. Well, one of the things I had learned from my scrutiny of all the BFRO traffic was that there was a family in southern Oklahoma who was having repeat visitations, and they did not like it at all. It was the Humphreys, and they were outside of this town called Honaby. It it's spelled Honobia, but they say Hanabi. The Humphreys were getting visited, and one of the things that was happening was they were losing things from their freezer. They had an outdoor freezer, and it was getting raided at night. Well, I happened to ask Alan and April Hoyt if they had an outdoor freezer. They said, yeah, we do. And I said, have you ever lost anything from it under mysterious circumstances? He said, you bet we have. One day I came out, and the freezer was wide open, and there was a side of a pig that we're going to have for a Polynesian pig roast where you bury the pig and everything, and it was gone. Half of a pig. And yet there was 2 boxes of ice cream bars still in the fridge. So they were pretty sure that the kids weren't stealing from them, or the neighborhood kids. He accused his kids, well, will you please close the freezer door? And they said, we didn't leave the freezer door open. What became clear is that Alan and April were getting hit in their freezer just the way the Humphreys were. So I was like, there it is. We're going to do an experiment. We're going to put a camera on the freezer, which we did. As soon as we did that, everything stopped. We stayed with it for a while, but nothing happened. Meanwhile, the activity shifted to another part of the property. So we moved the cameras. And then when we moved the cameras, the freezer got hit again. It started to become clear that they understood cameras. That blew my mind, because up till that point I thought we're dealing with something with no more sophistication than a bear, deer, elk, whatever. Something seemed to understand and not like the cameras. So my work with Alan and April really changed my thinking about the degree of sophistication that these creatures possessed. And it went even greater than that, because eventually we started trying even more far out ideas as I met other people who said, I have telepathic capabilities. And I said, good, would you ask them to please step in front of the camera? And funny thing was that the next day, Alan and April got something in front of the camera. It wasn't more than sort of a shadow puppet thing. They weren't going to say hi. They were averse to cameras, but they acknowledged our attempts to reach out telepathically. Well, this was in 2000. So, boy, I had to keep my mouth shut. All I could do was write it down. And I didn't even put most of it in the first book, but then the second book became more of all right, there's something else going on here, and that was called Edges of Science, and perhaps that's the book that might have gotten a lot of people thinking that there's a lot more to this, and there's a much higher degree of intelligence than we previously expected. I'm sorry, but I cannot do that. I cannot dial back my message just for the sake of saleability, especially when I'm very confident that there's something to the view that we're dealing with creatures that are as sophisticated as we are, if not more. So, right, it's a funny argument. Lauren Coleman uses it a lot too. It's almost like, will you please shut up because you're hurting our case? And I guess my counter argument would be, well, the case that you're proposing is not supported by the full body of facts as I'm seeing them. So all I can suggest is you do it your way. I'll do it my way. We'll have to wait maybe decades to see what holds water here. But What I'm not going to do is squelch anyone else, even if they disagree with me. And I'm not going to be squelched by someone who is basically saying, will you please shut up for political purposes? No. And that's bad science, is to have force the facts to fit your predisposed point of view. More scientific is to revise your theory when new facts contradict that which you thought to be the case, as goes back as far as Galileo. One of the things that it seems like the entities themselves appreciate is someone who is not just live and let live, as opposed to setting lethal traps, but also someone who isn't trying to sort of capitalize on it all. It does seem that the phenomenon cooperates when the intention is a bit more pure. He wrote that Sasquatch Savant about how they're so meticulous and they are so detail oriented that they basically have every twig memorized, and when you go through the woods and you move a twig, they see it the way only a savant would. And we do that a lot around here, and we get really interesting responses. But we'll bend a stick into a circle, and then we'll come back a few days later, and then there will be a leaf stabbed into the end of the thing, and then we'll add another, and it becomes a game, one that you cannot take to the bank in terms of saying, oh, that's proof of Bigfoot. No, it isn't. It's proof only that someone is toying with the branches. But here we are on private property where there are no other visitors, and yet we have these funny things that occur as if they are invitations for us to recognize, for us to notice the details. So I've gotten a lot better at paying attention to things as I walk around in the woods, and I've noticed that mostly it happens at trail junctions. They mark the trail junctions, and so that's where we play the games. A lot of what they call research is just putting yourself out there and inviting things to happen to you. But I've had dead animals that I found here on the property that were extremely mysterious. We see that all the time, actually. But most of the time we just figure, well, the thing just died. But why is this mole lying there uninjured, undamaged but dead? One time we came home from a vacation and there was a part of a cat lying in the yard. One leg, the head, and the collar. And the collar had the cat's name on it and the number of the owner. And the cat's name was Little Bits, oddly enough. The rest of the cat was found up the road, so we could account for the entire animal. None of it was eaten. I called the number. The people live 6 miles away on the other side of the river, and the cat was an indoor cat that never went out of the house. How do you account for it getting here? If a mountain lion carried it here, why wouldn't it have eaten part of it? We found the entire animal. It was as if we were being invited to find this. The owners were taken aback, and they thought maybe we were part of some sort of cruel event. I said, no, we just found the cat in your yard. I just wanted you to know. And they said, well, we used to live less than a mile away from there. I said, do you think your cat might have done a Home Alone journey back to its roots? And they said, no, the cat never leaves the house. I said, well, how did the cat get out? We said, we don't know. All we know is the cat disappeared from inside, and now it's found That's one thing. I was on a vacation with my family, and I was working on my novel one, Shady Neighbors, and I had the whole novel on the computer. And as I was moving all our stuff into our hotel room at Many Glacier, my computer disappeared. And I was crestfallen. I just lost the whole book. And but I decided I wasn't going to worry about it. I was going to vacation with my family. I probably overprogrammed myself in the first place. I went to the hotel manager and explained to her, would you please look out for this? But I think someone stole it. I don't know. 2 days later, she called me up at another hotel. She traced where I had gone to through their computer system. Fortunately, I was still within the national park system, and she told me your computer showed up in Whitefish, Montana, in the back of a guy's truck. The guy had been to the Many Glacier Lodge. He filled cash machines with money, and that was his job, to go around and refill the cash machines. And he stayed the night in the hotel, and his truck was parked right out in front of the hotel, and someone or something put the computer in the back of his truck, and then he got up at 4 a.m. and drove back to his home in Whitefish and found the computer in the back of his truck. And there was a checkbook. That's how he found my name. And there was the computer, and there might have even been a cell phone. Untouched. None of it touched. And it's like, to this day, I cannot explain how that happened. But somehow my pocket got picked, and I sometimes wonder humorously whether they didn't open up their computer and go, oh, look at the story he's working on. I guess we can live with this. Okay, give him his computer back. I don't know how else to explain it. One of the strangest things I've ever had happen to me. There's a lot more detail that factors in, but one of them was that my family was just incredulous that this was happening, and you must have done this. Like, no. As we're driving in the guy's place, who had the computer in his possession, my wife was driving, and I said, stop. There was a large pile of hawk feathers right at the foot of the driveway. And so I jumped out and gathered them all up. And then when we went in, I offered to pay the guy a reward. He said, I don't want a reward. I'm just happy you got your property back. I said, by the way, did you see all the hawk feathers at the foot of your driveway? No. Well, did you? He said, I was out there today picking up the mail. And somehow between the morning and when we arrived midday, there was a pile of hawk feathers right there. So those are the kinds of things that sort of invite you to wonder whether you're being toyed with by sophisticated beings who know exactly what you're doing. And if you're sort of the acceptable mindset, they toy with you and invite you to notice and wonder, but they're never going to step out of the shadows. They're just going to give you indications, nothing empirical. And that seems to be the pattern again and again. They know exactly how far they can go without giving away the store. I sometimes wonder whether after the Patterson-Gimlin footage was collected, that they didn't have a Sasquatch get-together, and they turned to Patty, the subject female Sasquatch, and I wonder if they didn't say, you idiot. And she must have said, I didn't know they could do that. But after that happened, no one ever got anything again like that. To this day, there's lots of phone videos, but nothing as empirical and clear as that 16 millimeter piece of footage. It's almost as if they decided, okay, new plan, never again. It is being photographed is forbidden. In fact, I've heard it said by Cliff, among others, that of all the people who put cameras in the woods in the hopes of catching a glimpse of a Sasquatch, they never succeed. The only footages that have been obtained are from hunters who are after deer. But once you are after Sasquatch, then they more or less know what you're up to, and they're not going to cooperate. We had a meeting with a guy named Bob Faust, who had studied shamanism in Hawaii and in Ecuador, and we took him up to one of our favorite spots in the Clackamas Range, which is called Roaring River, and he sat there with this folded up piece of cloth that looked like a Ouija board, and he unfolded it, and then he held this crystal and it would start to swing, and then he would go into a trance. But Guy Edwards and I were just sitting there watching this happen around the campfire with a can of beer in our hand, and he said, "What? Okay, here she is. Do you have any questions?" And we were able to hand Bob a question and get an immediate answer. The first one we asked was, well, how many of there are you? And he ponders for a minute, the crystal swings, and then he says, there's two of us. There's me and my son. Well, where is your husband? The star people took him. When is he coming back? I don't know. Can we see you? Could you step out? Could we see you? And the answer was no. There's a rule. I've never been seen. It's considered a screw up, and I'm not going to screw up. That, again, kind of supports the idea that even as far as the Patterson-Gimlin footage, that there's a code that they abide by, and one important point is thou shalt not be seen or photographed. It's a screw-up. There was a teacher across the hall from me, Shauna, whose boyfriend disappeared in the Great Lava Beds, which is up by Mount St. Helens, Goose Lake. And he and another spelunker were exploring the Great Lava Beds. They split up to go around a pressure ridge. A terrible rainstorm befell them, and Chris Zitzowitz, the boyfriend, never came around the other side of the pressure ridge. After searching for him, his partner finally went to the authorities, and they did a whole search party. The weather was horrible. He never was seen again. Well, our principal emailed us, said Shauna lost her boyfriend. They're still looking for him, but please treat her delicately. Well, I ran straight across the hall, and I go, Shauna, what the heck's going on? She goes, I don't know. I said, why are you even here? You should be at home or helping with the search. She said, they don't want me up there. But they're searching for him, and I don't know how this is going to end. So I said, well, I'm going to try something. So I called up Kathleen Odom, a Native American, lives on the southern Oregon coast, and I explained to her the situation and said, well, you're another one of these animal whisperers, a contactee, a psychic. Could we use your skills to reach out and find out what happened to Chris? And she said, all right, I need a picture of him and a few other background details. I said, I'll see what I can do. Well, then she called me back the next day and said, I found it all. It's all on the KGW website, because the story was in the news. Missing hiker up there, big lava beds. And so she said, I got everything I need. She calls me back 2 days later And she said, okay, here's what I found. Scientifically not provable, just to qualify. But she said, they said it wasn't us. And she said, please explain. And they said, well, it was the green ones. He went with the green ones. And he did it voluntarily. We tried to stop him, but he went. And he is not on this planet anymore. So that's what Kathleen got. The thing I can't help but appreciate is they don't charge money. They're not looking for attention. They know that this stuff is just scientifically holds no water. But she's willing to tell me what she got. And it was very interesting that they said, it wasn't us. But there are other nefarious entities. And, of course, the green ones, you would be easy to suppose, would be synonymous with the reptilians, as we are, look into the whole Mount Shasta thing. That's a set of entities that are, again, seen as coming from somewhere else. Now, after 3 books on Sasquatch, I finally started looking in other directions. And one of the things that started to resonate with what I was hearing and reading and deducing was that they must emanate from a subterranean realm. And that's what Chris Zitz was looking into when he disappeared, is this. He was exploring caves. I started to wonder, where do the Sasquatch go when they want privacy? And I think the best answer that I can come up with is subterranean. Henry Franzoni was in complete agreement, which was gratifying, that at least someone was saying, no, you're right. And in fact, Native American sources, 100%. They emanate from within the earth. So I started looking into that. And that led me to this latest book, which barely mentions the Sasquatch phenomenon. I mean, if I can't resolve the Sasquatch phenomenon in 3 books, I need to shut the hell up. So this book just says, where do they go? And then from there, I extrapolate and suppose and look at bits of evidence that suggest that there is a subterranean realm. It has been in existence for thousands of years, and the various entities, the Sasquatch and the extraterrestrials, if you will, cross paths in these subterranean hideouts. They probably, work in consort with each other, but I am now of the thinking that most of the stuff we see in the sky and call UFOs or UAPs actually emanates from within the earth. They may have come from outer space at one point, but they are now very much here. And most of the UFO phenomenon actually emanates from within the earth. Instead of being interdimensional, the subterranean realm could be thought of as a different dimension. We live up here on the surface of the earth, and so we're kind of 2-dimensional. We go up a little bit, we go down a little bit, but we don't go really down. That's another dimension. And so dimensionality could be a lot more physical than this Star Trek kind of transportation that we don't understand. Although there is some of that. How they come and go, I don't believe that there are in all cases tunnels. They are somehow able to move through solid material and then collect their atoms and then truck around like we do for a while. And all these Russian authors. The Russian military is a lot more forthcoming about underwater events that they've seen in submarine and ship activity. All kinds of stuff. The U.S. military isn't so forthcoming, but when you talk to individuals, they sure enough see things moving under the water at high speeds, coming out, and there is no government on Earth that has a medium travel craft that can do water and air. But that is exactly what these naval people are seeing on both sides of the Iron Curtain. I think we've hit a wall in Sasquatch research because there isn't really any more that we can do without the creatures themselves opening up. Now, maybe that's happened already in secret circles. There are those who feel it has, but whenever there's a possible military value of some body of knowledge, it's justification for keeping it under wraps. So I don't really know what there is that we can continue to glean from Sasquatch research as we're doing it, on our little low private individual basis where we put cameras out and maybe we go out and zen and try to bring them in. But that's being done in a lot of places, and there's a lot of information is being gotten, but it's the same stuff over and over, and it will never strengthen the case in the minds of a skeptical public. So other than full disclosure from government sources of everything they know, and I'm not holding my breath on that one, I don't really know what else we can do other than everybody keep doing it their way, and including the flesh and blood guys and the woo guys, and just everybody keep doing it. But for crying out loud, write it down. Don't let the information get lost, and then we can put it together and look for patterns. Now, patterns are indications, but they're not proof. But I think we're just going to have to be patient, and I frankly don't expect that in my lifetime these questions will be completely answered. There are those like Stephen Greer who's saying, well, it's just they're waiting for us to get sophisticated. And when we do, and sophisticated might be actually being more down to earth, less reliant on technology, and more sensitive to life in all forms, just kind of that touchy-feely stuff that a lot of people are bringing that to the Sasquatch question, and they're getting interesting results. But changing the thinking to the point where it becomes textbook, for instance, Sasquatches exist. They're actually an evolutionary entity that emerged on the planet. They could be what we call Java man or Homo erectus. I think they are. Some people who reach out telepathically have gotten the message that we are from here, you are not. That humanity was placed here, genetically engineered, but we were here before you were. And that's part of what I also treat in this new book, Planet Strange, is that there is a good case to be made that, yes, evolution happens, but human evolution happened way too fast to be explainable by Darwinian processes of, mutation and natural selection and so on. The human eye is probably the best single example of something that could not have evolutionarily evolved, because each of the intermittent steps of its evolution would have had to have been advantageous in order for that to keep going, and that would not be the case. There are parts of human evolution that defy simple Darwinian explanation. One of them just is the speed at which humanity appeared on the fossil record. It does not make sense that something could take those huge leaps without help. And there's an analogy in computer programming that says no computer program was ever written by a person who wasn't smarter than the program. Human DNA is a program, pure and simple. And whoever wrote that program had to be smarter than the program they wrote. That's a universal truth of computer programming, and I think applicable to genetics as well. I don't put a lot of stock in my sightings. They're unspectacular compared to these guys who get the full view. But the one sighting that I had was I was floating down the Clackamas River 2 miles upstream from here, and extremely relaxed and just staring blankly at the foliage going by. And all of a sudden, I saw what looked like a head and shoulders standing there in profile. And so then I sat up in my boat and peered at it, and then it went down. And I know what I saw, but I couldn't stop, because then we're just going into a rapid, and so no ability to stop. But I hiked back up there the next day, put cameras up there. This was back when I was into that. And I got a really interesting image of something very blurry and some weird glowing thing on its leg. So that was my one maybe sighting. But I have found this: if you don't put emphasis on seeing them, that you can be around them a lot. That they will come up to you, but they're not going to step out and shake your hand. And I have had encounters in the woods back here where something came up to me, and I froze and stood there and waited and waited and waited for 20 minutes, and it didn't budge. And I finally thought I was imagining things, and then I started walking down the trail, 2 a.m. in the morning, and then the thing started moving again and came right up to me. And at the point at which I could hear it less than 10 feet away, on the basis of the scuffing on the ground of the feet, I couldn't see anything. Before, there was enough starlight, maybe a little moonlight, I could see the outline of the trees, but all of a sudden my visual sense was just cut off. It was in complete darkness. And then another one was right behind me and did this to my ear. I jumped out of my socks and I ran out of the woods, and I got back to the house, and I sat down on the deck and started taking my shoes off, and then the bedroom light, as I was taking my shoes off, I heard a cackling coming from the far tree line. It sounded like laughter. So I went in and asked my wife, "What are you doing up? It's 2 a.m. And she said, "What the hell was that noise?" And I said, "So, you agree that was not a coyote?" She said, "I have never heard that noise before." And all I could think was that they were laughing at me, and that I just, they got the drop on me, and they just thought it was great fun. Henry Franzoni likes to say there is a story in the Clackamas tribe of the Chinook Nation that in order to get your badge, that is, prove your Sasquatch manhood, you have to touch a person without being seen. So that's a bit of Indian lore, and that seemed consistent with what. So I like to think, well, great. I'm glad if I help some teenager get his badge, I'm glad. The worst advice I got was, you need to use 50 caliber rounds to bring one down. That was a guy from Texas who was visiting Oklahoma when I was there for the Honobia conference. Anyway, there are people, and not only in Texas, but certainly there are some in Texas, who are of the view that I have to shoot one to prove it, and I'm going to try. So that's, of course, disturbing on several levels. But I know that mindset is out there, and I can't do anything to change it. So I don't think they're going to succeed, because I think the creatures are smarter than that. So I'm hoping that that's the case. I think it is, but I do know that there are people to this day who feel it's their mission and opportunity to shoot one if they can. After 2 years of trying to get images on camera and using the psychics, eventually Alan and April said, we kind of want this to be done. And I said, actually, so do I. I'm kind of burnt out on this. My wife, thinks I'm having an affair or something, because I'm going up to Chehalis, Washington all the time. I'm ready to be done. But they said, well, part of the problem is we've been having a lot of problem with our phone. And so we had the phone guy come. This was in the days of landlines. We all had little cell phone flip phones in those days. This was 1999, 2000. They told me our phones were acting up, and so we had the phone company out there, and the guy was visibly shaken. He said, your phone is being tapped, and I found 2 different places where the line was tapped. So it wasn't my phone that was being tapped that I know of. It was Alan and April's. But of course, we were in contact. So I don't really know whether my phones were messed with, and I guess I don't care. I just assumed that I was being spied upon. We had seen suspicious cars parked there outside of their property, and so we knew that somebody was interested in what we were doing, but I just refused to let it change my way of being. Eventually, it goes away. The London tracks, of which there are about 130, all found in Cottage Grove Reservoir when the reservoir is drawn down in the winter in a big exposed mud flat. I'm quite sure they're authentic. There were just too many of them, and I see changes from track to track in the splay of the toes and so forth that it is not consistent with somebody out there with fake tracks. You'd have to have a whole pack full of fake tracks and then pull one out and put it down, and then the next one pull another one out and put it down. The stride was too great. Unfortunately, sometimes the stuff gets poo-pooed by somebody with some stature. In that case, it was Jeff Meldrum. Finally, the tracks got shown to him, and he said, oh, no, clearly fake, because there is no mid-tarsal break or something like that. And I disagree, but between Jeff and then Cliff, they've decided that they're not authentic, and so they are poo-pooing them whenever they get a chance to do that. I'm not going to throw them away. If anything, because they've been discredited by, the biggest name out there, I was able to get the rest of them from other people who we had given them to, and they said, well, I guess they're no good anymore. I said, give them to me. So now I have the whole collection. I think they're authentic, but I'm not wasting my time trying to get it out there and prove that. It's another thing that might have to wait decades. The Coconut Telegraph is a Jimmy Buffett song, first of all, and it's about the kind of communication that they have between proximitous islands in the Bahamas, that they actually sit there and tap, and they have a Morse code that's worked out. And it's almost salacious. In other words, it's rumor, and it's who's sleeping with who, that they enjoy communicating by this manner, but it is something authentic. But then Jimmy Buffett wrote a song about it, or I think it was the name of an album. But I hijacked the term to refer to what is either called most properly telepathy, or mind speak, or horse whispering. But it's just the idea that there is a form of communication that is nonverbal and very, very effective, and the Saskies got it. In Oregon, the highest concentration is Clackamas County, which is where we sit. Washington, Mount Rainier, has more. There are other places that have a good deal of stuff. Northern California, for sure. But in Oregon, Clackamas County, now again, you need two things to have a sighting. You got to have a Sasquatch, you got to have a person. And Clackamas County has a dense population, a large area, and proximity to woods. So it's kind of got the right combination of circumstances. But there are Sasquatch sightings in Multnomah County, which is Portland, and even out in the desert. So they happen all over the place. But for whatever reason, Clackamas County is the number one. And I think it has to do with the volcanic landscape and the caves. Because again, I suspect that they emanate from subterranean realm. I think what people need to know is that nothing is going to happen in the near term that will resolve the question. It's going to take decades before the cat is out of the bag, or that full disclosure takes place. But when it does, I believe it is going to identify the fact that they are in cahoots with other entities. The Sasquatch do the heavy lifting, and maybe do a lot of the maintenance on this subterranean realm because they're supremely powerful. But they are directed by more powerful entities who seem to come and go from our world with a lot more capabilities. But the Sasquatch are one entity of several that interact subterranean. And that's what the whole Planet Strange thing is about. The publisher is Doug Hychick, and he's in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and his publishing company is called Hangar One. And they specialize in paranormal subjects. So really cool outfit. I'm just thrilled to be to have a publisher who embraces the paranormal to the extent that he does.